Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Festival of Treasury Transformation session on the future of cash forecasting. You have the bios of our great panelists for this session. So I'm not going to read them out, but I'm going to ask each of our panelists in turn to tell us just a little bit extra about themselves and what their particular interest in and connection with cash flow forecasting is. And I'd like to start, please, with Gerard.
Thank you, Caroline. My name is Gerard, or Gerard, as Caroline quite nicely mentions in Dutch. Since 3 years, I'm part of the Treasury team in Switzerland, the Unilever Treasury team. Within Treasury, I'm responsible for systems, processes, transactional banking, and global cash management solutions. Before I joined Treasury in 2017, I was on the other side, so to say. I was heading up back and middle office in Rotterdam, in the Netherlands. That got outsourced to a Unilever team in India, and I got the opportunity to move to Treasury. Obviously, with COVID and the extra attention on cash and liquidity, also within Unilever, there's much more focus on this. We always had an interest in forecasting, but never found the time or the opportunity to implement a proper cash forecasting process. Now with COVID, it's definitely back on the agenda, and even senior management is supporting with budgets a change in forecasting process.
Thanks very much, Gerard. If we could move to Ginny now, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Caroline. Hello, everyone. I'm Ginny Wu. This is my pleasure as a panel speaker in this section of ACT, Festival of Treasury Transformation. I'm a chartered accountant, a highly accomplished senior finance and treasury executive with extensive working experience in renowned multinationals, US, Hong Kong, and Asia listed company. From treasury perspective, I participated in the process of $2.4 billion syndication loan in a Singaporean listed company, which won the best syndication loan in the 2009 Asian Award. So the success of it were partly driven by a great and cash flow forecasting. And that's the reason why, especially nowadays in the COVID-19, so a great cash flow forecasting is crucial for everyone else. Thank you.
Thanks, Ginny. And I'll turn to James now.
Great, thank you, Caroline. So I'm James, I'm the Group Treasurer of Chalhoub Group, and I'm also a member of the ACT Advisory Panel for the Middle East. I've been based in Dubai now for the past 6 years. Before then, I was in London working with Deloitte. Chalhoub is a luxury brand partner across the Middle East region, mainly in 14 markets. We're working with many well-known international brand names, so the likes of Louis Vuitton, Sephora, Swarovski, to name a few. And this is mainly across the fashion, beauty, and gift sector. And we have a partnership with Havas on the media side. I'd say as a retailer, we were heavily impacted by COVID. So we had around 600 stores that all had to close during the lockdown. And we also saw an exponential shift to e-commerce and a growth there. I think within the Middle East specifically, cash flow forecasting has grown in importance over the last few years. So going up to 2014, we're at double-digit growth. Most companies had plenty of liquidity, didn't need to focus on cash forecasting as much. Since then, the growth trajectory has been a lot slower, and hence there's been a lot more focus on that. And I think COVID is only going to accelerate it further. So I'm very interested in this topic as a treasurer, and delighted to be here today and speak to you all. So thank you.
Thanks, James. And now we're going to hop a little further around the globe and back to Nicolas.
Thank you, Caroline. My name is Nicolas Christiaen. I'm the CEO and the co-founder of Cashforce, which is a global cash flow forecasting and working capital analytics software platform. So my interest is we are basically a provider in this particular space, a software provider. The business that we've been building is very exciting. We've now busy with the subject for about 6 years. And the reason why we actually got to start with this business is about 8 years ago, I was working with my other co-founders in private equity portfolio businesses, and we were busy doing cash flow forecasting and working capital. Found it very cumbersome, manual, error-prone to do everything in Excel, and we saw a little bit of a blank space in the market there. So now, about 8 years later from that moment, we serve companies around the globe, helping them with this specific process in collaboration with our global banking partners like CD, BNP, and others.
Thanks, Nicolas, and thanks again to all of you for joining us here today. Now, I'm hearing from treasurers the same thing. It's even more difficult now to predict cash flow 3 to 6 months out than it was at the onset of COVID-19 or when there were the first lockdowns, shall we say. So at that time, maybe you knew for sure you weren't going to get any revenue. Things were closed down. Now we've got this rather complex situation where different economies are opening up more or less. It's affecting different industries in different ways. I'd like to ask, first of all, my Treasury Finance panellists, are they seeing that? Would they agree with that assessment? And what's it looking like out there? What are the challenges? So maybe I could turn to back to Gerard for this one, please, first of all.
Thanks, Caroline. Interesting question indeed. As Christian, as Nicolas also mentioned, cash forecasting never has been easy. Error-proof, accuracy was not there, and that now with COVID hasn't changed. It's even becoming more and more difficult to predict the right cash in your company. Unilever is normally quite crisis-proof. FMCG company with sales across the globe. What we have seen is that I mean, I think everybody saw that China closing in March, followed by Europe in the following months. It all had its specifics in terms of managing cash. We saw China having a specific need for cash immediately when they went into lockdown, whereas in Europe and the Americas, stockpiling created a lot of cash on that side. Also, in terms of divisions, we saw a huge difference. Ice cream and food solution services that deliver to restaurants were almost completely on a standstill, and staff in that division were moved to other divisions. So not only on a geographical basis, but also on a division basis, on a product basis, it was very difficult to predict the cash. What we also saw is that certain processes which we thought were working and sort of taken for granted, like the debtor process, were not working as expected in practice as they should do. So we noticed a lot of overdue debtors on that side. And a certain hygiene needs to be done and needs to be maintained going forward in order to make that work again in terms of managing our cash. Overall, because of the business we're in, we think we're okay in terms of cash. We're an investment-grade company, as most of you know probably. So it's easy to get the cash in. We issued some bonds in March to get the liquidity to make sure that we do not run out of cash. But overall, till now, we have been managing our cash in a decent way, and actually much better than we thought we could do in terms of the forecast that we had in mind end of last year for half one. Mm-hmm. Not sure what the third quarter will bring, because US, certain parts of the US and also Latin America are still facing COVID, and the cases are increasing. So there we are a bit more strict in managing our cash, but certainly in Asia, China, and Europe, we're pretty okay in terms of cash.
Thanks, Gerard. Very, very interesting. Ginny, how's it look from where you're sitting?
Okay, thank you, Caroline. Yes, in the last half year of 2020, I think we are all in a very uncertain COVID-19 world. Traditionally and historically, cognitive cash flow forecasting, that an AI-driven system that learns and adapts from the data it injects on an ongoing basis. However, when we look at COVID-19 right nowadays, we see there are no trends on which a system can extrapolate. So, however, a cash flow forecasting has proved key for treasurers to truly understand their positions when liquidity is key and cash limited. So during the the emergence from lockdown, predictions are more challenging than ever, and data is key to accurate predictions. It was. Well, we have no doubt that a sound cash flow forecast is a crucial part of decision making. In the same way, checking the weather report in the morning is a part of preparing for the day ahead, right? So even nowadays, we are not only for rainy days, but a storm, a hurricane. Okay, we don't know when it will be finished. So we are in a dark right now, and so even the meteorologists may not be exact in their predictions of the weather. So in fact, cash flow forecasting do need to be more reliable than the weather person. So, so in this case, we want to know what action to take in the present to ensure highest probability of comfort and preparedness in the future, such as business sustainability, supply chain, and also resources management. So these are the critical part of a forecast that offers possibility and typical best case and worst case scenario for us. So you have the fundamental and foundation for taking the next step forward. It may not matter what the exact cash balance is in 3 months' time, but what matters is that you can more confidently decide what your next step going to be. And ultimately, the goal of the forecast is to enable us to make better, preparation and prioritize our direction and decisions about our business in these stormy days. Thank you.
So that's really, really interesting and very, very helpful. And I liked that analogy with the meteorologist. So I hope that we're all going to do a little bit better than they tend to do, because, well, certainly in my country, we're not terribly good at assessing the weather. That's for sure. I'll move to James now, if I may.
Yeah, thank you. So I think some of that definitely rings true for us as well. So previously as a retailer, we could predict fairly well what would happen with our sales, what would happen with our cash inflows based on historic trends and seasonality. And that was a fairly straightforward exercise. Now, clearly with COVID, everything has just been thrown out of the window and we've had to start from scratch to a certain extent. So what we really do now is look at different scenarios and then assign probabilities to them and then update those scenarios as we get more information, because no one has a crystal ball and we clearly don't know where we're going. So at Chalhoub, we have 3 scenarios at the moment. We've got a baseline scenario, we've got a best case and also a worst case. So three is quite manageable for us, and then we just keep reviewing that and updating it on an ongoing basis. And I don't think we're out of the COVID woods quite yet, but we'll keep monitoring that. So in terms of the challenges with our forecasting, I'd say the first challenge is that our systems aren't particularly great at modeling different scenarios and being able to be updated quickly. So we can prepare cash flow forecasts, but then if we have to change them quickly for a new scenario, that can be quite a manual exercise and involves a lot of teams, a lot of reworking, and hence time. So that can be limiting for us and reduce what we're able to do sometimes. I think the next challenge we faced recently is shifting the time frame of our forecasts. So before we were quite happy to say, look at monthly forecasts or even longer. Now that liquidity is at a premium, we need to be looking at much more granular forecasts in a much shorter range. So we've shifted from monthly to weekly. And that was a challenge, just getting there and getting the relevant data from the right sources. So rather than just being all indirect from P&L balance sheet, looking at more of a bottom-up direct approach for accuracy. And I think the third point related to those is around getting access to the data. So the data is in perhaps lots of different systems, and it's not always easy to extract in the way you'd like from the ERP into the cash flow forecast. So we've had some challenges there recently, just cleansing that data and doing it better and communicating with all the various teams involved. So there's a shift that's going on, and what I'd say COVID has done is help us to accelerate what was already happening behind the scenes. So from that side, there is a silver lining, at least, to this crisis.
Yeah, that's a kind of general trend we're seeing with COVID-19, isn't it? That there are some silver linings, there are some things that are being accelerated, and the improvement in cash flow forecasting, it seems to be part of that. But I'd like to turn to Nicolas now to see, is that what you're really hearing from your clients, for example? And sometimes I'm hearing that there were people who were really not prepared. Either their business didn't ever require cash flow forecasting, they were very secure, and now there's this shock suddenly hit them. And there are others who are doing it, but maybe reluctantly. What's your view, Nicolas?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, first of all, to hear Gerard, James, and Ginny, let's say, talking through their sort of perspective on how COVID, let's say, is affecting, has affected, will affect, and continue to affect their business, but as well their process. And I think I can sort of echo a couple of their reactions, in the sense that what we hear from the corporates is very much that some of them said, well, our business is not really hit too much by the crisis, but it has sort of stimulated the interest in the topic itself. Then we hear corporates, and I remember one phone call from, let's say, a prospect that we were dealing with, that literally picked up the phone and said, well, I'm sorry, we wish we had Cashforce at the time, but now we are bound to our Excel spreadsheets because we're in firefighting mode. So we'll get back to you later. But we also got phone calls from, let's say, ongoing projects which were suddenly, let's say, very much pushed to get to go live, like imminently, like tomorrow, the day after, just to make sure that they could actually start using it as soon as possible. So it has accelerated different processes. I think what is mentioned earlier on corporates that have never done it, we absolutely see that as well. So we had different, I would say, requests from clients that haven't never basically executed, call it a very thorough cash flow forecasting process. Let's say just maybe an indirect one at the, let's say, one time a year, but never a direct one on a frequent basis. And this is exactly what we're seeing in the market in general. There's a push to get a more frequent update, a more frequent cash flow forecast being done. But that, of course, results in more workload being generated if the access to data remains the same, or the level of systems and automation remains the same. And it will, of course, increase the, I would say, the error proneness, which I called out at the beginning of the session. So everything is getting into an acceleration mode, and also links between cash flow, the cash flow and working capital are being made. I think related to the point that Gerard mentioned, credit risk, looking to your debtors and how they behave in this particular crisis, has been an attention point for a lot of our clients. And let's say, we're in contact quite frequently on, how can Cashforce help there to monitor that credit risk. And maybe one last point, which wasn't necessarily discussed yet, is about the horizons itself. So if you think about a cash flow forecast, you could do that short term, midterm, long term. And we also there see different shifts happening, in the sense of some businesses that are, let's say, very imminently need cash, or they need to really manage that cash on the short term. They're very much focused on that short term, where maybe earlier or before COVID-19, they never have been. Other businesses that say, well, we have, a bit of a runway in a way, so we want to focus on what's ahead and run different scenarios. And there I can very much relate to what James said earlier. The importance of scenarios is super crucial. So where earlier just one scenario was sufficient, now different scenarios need to be run, because there are different, we cannot forecast how like Ginny said, like the weather's gonna be. We cannot forecast too much. Let's say how COVID and I guess the governmental reactions to COVID are going to play out. I guess certainly the second one being a very difficult factor to calculate anyway. So a lot of things going on and happening out there.
Well, thanks very much, Nicolas. And that concept of lots of different scenarios, and in my day at Unilever and other places, it was very much involved in range forecasting and taking those different scenarios, how good could it get or how bad could it be, and then using a bit of probability and so on, though it's very difficult in these times. But seeing those different scenarios and seeing what your range is, I think is so much more useful than just having one forecast. But you also touched on horizons and many other points. I'd just like to turn back to the treasurers on the panel just to see if they'd like to corroborate what you're saying or add anything to that. So maybe turn to, is there anyone of our treasurers who'd like to add something to that point or other points that Nicolas has made?
Maybe let me start off, Caroline. It's the interesting points that Nicolas mentioned. In terms of horizon, there's this really short-term cash forecasting where it's the direct method, where you want to see what happens today, tomorrow, and the coming, let's say, 2 weeks. If you move out and start looking at your trading working capital, debtors creditor, you quite quickly move to an indirect method, which, depending on the end user, whether that be treasury or performance management, could be 6 months out or one year out. One of the difficulties that we see and face from time to time is the mismatch between the direct short-term method and the trading working capital forecasting process, which works via the indirect method. It's at least what we see very difficult to tie the two together to come to something meaningful in the end. Systems like Cashforce potentially could work in that area, because you could address both. In my view, the short term via maybe API connections or connection with SAP or your ledger systems for the actual data, debtor creditor data, and then on your debtor the data, analyzing your working capital in the longer term. So I think horizon is important, but depends on the end users of the forecast.
Well, thanks very much, Gerard. And you mentioned their systems, obviously. And one of the things that fascinates me about the whole topic of forecasting in general, and also specifically cash flow forecasting, is the fact that there is a strong behavioural element. If you're bringing together pieces from around the business, as our panelists have referred to earlier, you're relying quite a bit on what other people are telling you. And so whereas systems can look at trends and all the data, and that's really, really important, there's also this behavioural side too. And I found that really helped me looking at that when I was at Unilever and was able to bring the largest unit of Unilever Foods Europe from 4th quartile accuracy of forecasting up into 1st quartile. And that was really getting to understand people, having transparent conversations about contingencies amongst other things, but also looking to have a healthy relationship with my finance directors around Europe to really understand what they were saying. And even if their boss was pushing them to say something different, we could kind of behind the scenes work out what we really thought was the case. That was really, really helpful for us. So I just wanted to turn to the panel and ask, first of all, Nicolas, what would you say is possible from a systems point of view in the current environment when we're in this period of radical uncertainty, if you like? And where does that behavioural element, which will always exist, come in? And are the solutions which take both of those challenges into account? Because the data bit is maybe more obvious than the behavioural bit, but maybe you could reflect a little bit on that, Nicolas.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Caroline, you make some great points, and I think you touch maybe on one of the points that is rarely discussed and is not always, let's say, brought to the front. Because although as a salesman for my own business, I would like to say that our system improves in all cases, in all scenarios, the accuracy. It's quite unrealistic, and it has to do exactly with the points that you mentioned. So consider this analogy or scenario. If you would have all the same system with the same data as an input, but there would be different people using it with different incentives, then you could basically get to totally different conclusions. So for us, the outcome of quality cash flow forecasting process is very much as well determined by the incentives provided for the process itself by the users. And typically, when you consider an environment where different elements from the data systems, from the systems, come into, let's say, the cash flow forecasting system, but in the end, there is always an override function or a way that, let's say, users can interact with that data, and that exactly will define, as well, for a big part, the accuracy of the system. So I think that that's one super important point to mention. Now, how do you overcome that sort of behavior element, or how can you look at the sort of cash flow forecasting process in general? For us, it's about automation. You're trying to facilitate a cash flow forecasting process, and by getting earlier data, more frequent data, by running these different scenarios, you're basically stimulating your access to these early markers where you can actually interact with that forecast. So it's about the interaction between cash flow forecasting and the business itself, rather than ultimately only the accuracy of the forecast. And this only comes more to the table with the COVID-19 situation, where I think Ginny mentioned it rightfully, is that trends, it's very difficult now to work with trends from, let's say, 3 quarters or years back, because they become now a danger to your forecast. And I would say, obviously, what is important today is that the data systems now, they provide good information for, let's say, the coming weeks to come, because the data is there in the system. But it ultimately is the automation and the trends that you'll pick up from the last weeks that will get you to think, okay, how are the next weeks are going to be? So a couple of years later, I always say this, a couple of years later, we'll see this as a sort of one-off event. But today we're right within the middle of this one-off event, and that makes it extremely difficult. So the only thing is we can trust on the data which sits in our system for the very short term, and we need to look and study historically what's going on in the last couple of weeks, but not the last quarters or months or let's say years, because they will be very not trustworthy to count upon.
Absolutely. James, your thoughts?
Thank you, Caroline. I would echo a lot of what I've been hearing. So now is an excellent time to drive through that change and to really improve the cash flow forecasting in our organisations. So for me, I mean, the system is important and systems are great, but they're not a panacea to resolve all the issues that we're hearing. So I think the point you made about behavioural aspects is also key. So I've been at Chalhoub now for several years, and I've been on the journey while I'm there. So I've seen the organisation gradually shift from a P&L focus to a balance sheet focus, and then eventually to a cash generation, cash flow forecasting one. And those changes don't happen overnight, but as those cultural changes happen, it's then easier to work with those stakeholders to get the right behaviours, to get everybody aligned and in the right place. And then the system will be more effective as a result of that. So it's really just focusing as well on the people and making sure everything's in place. Within our own treasury, even last year, the year before, we were looking at cash. That was a priority for us. But perhaps for the business, there are other things going on as well. There are many competing priorities. So they're looking at supply chain, they're looking at procurement. Now that COVID's happened, there's actually this great time to accelerate everything. So the treasury priorities are very much at the focus now, and I'm having a lot of conversations with our CFO, our CEOs, and we're able to drive that forward. So I believe I saw a quote somewhere else in the ACT where someone said, now if you're a treasurer, you should be speaking to your CEO more than ever. And to me, that definitely rings true. So yeah, I'm hoping we can take this opportunity and push forward.
It's certainly a huge opportunity that people should take, isn't it? And Ginny, can we have your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. Yes, not only to incorporate procedures for a tightened cash flow review to react promptly, but also to put in place a cash flow forecast that with key elements expected, say, in a 13-week cash flow modeling. So along with application of modeling techniques to facilitate the creation of a robust and dynamic and also informative financial modules, such as a threat of warning signal. It is now serve as a survival action plan. And although also this module can fed out the cash shortfall and how to finance it, if it's revolving loan, yes or no, or when the loan will be received, and also how long can the business continue to meet payroll obligations, Are there any, potential problems with customer payments? Has that, payments slowed? Are these the elements that we can use it the AI and also some machine learning to build in our cash flow. Now, and also 13-week, cash flow is a kind of a really good timing or skeleton right now to start with, because you can use it as a midterm and long term, and also it offers a horizon for us to have a reasonable view of the health of the company, in which whether there is any a liquidity shortfalls should hit a company, or that is ability to pay for, if not ratify any issue before they occurred. So I think nowadays we have to be more on a holistic view. Not only look at the internal and also the macro situation, but also prepare for four main external business shock, such as a counterparty risk, economy risk, a natural risk, and also a political risk. So we have to put in all these elements in our cash flow forecasting. And also nowadays I think look at all these scenarios, measuring the counterparty risk is so crucial nowadays, because we have to diversify that client, if this is as much as possible, because if in a bad example that client is 80% of our revenue coming from, then which is very bad, that if some worst case that client is suffering the bankruptcy, then we will be suffering that risk as well. So all these elements we have to put in a consideration in our cash forecast. That's the reason why historically a treasury role is more quite operational, monitoring the cash flow and liquidity, and work out the reconciliation. And now it becomes more business driven, more critical on a strategic structure of the company we set, and in order to maximize the return of a working capital, and projecting those cash flows, and make sure that how long it's going to last. So so what we can say in the treasury nowadays got to be a more intuitive interactions with database, and also it's the time to invest in treasury technology. Stay smart and stay sharp, and keep engaging and upskilling with technology, and most importantly, be a member of ACT. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you for that, Ginny.
Thank you. Thank you.
ACT, we do try to support our members in every way.
Yeah.
It's a more and more challenging role, isn't it? That we're expected to be real business partners and understand all the different dynamics going on out there, rather than just being very focused and operational, looking inwards. But I think that's part of the excitement and the challenge of the job. And I know that treasurers say that looking at life again and careers again, most of them would stick with treasury. So even through these challenging times. So with that, maybe I'll move to Gerard to just get your perspectives on some of the points that have been raised so far.
Well, yeah, first of all, where can I become a member? Because I don't think I'm a member yet.
Well, you're like a member, you're so close to us, but we'll get that sorted.
Thank you. But jokes aside, no, obviously it's a couple of things from my end. Yes, we're getting much closer into the business. That's what we see as well, not only from a cash side, but also from a supplier finance, procurement side, distributed finance, etc. I think that's really good. We have been waiting long for that. Quite often we're seen as operations, like Ginny said. So we really have a chair on the table now. What's really important as well is that the organization see cash as important, and not focuses just on margin or just on sales, but also on cash as an important KPI, and maybe put some incentives around all of that. In terms of systems, very much agree with what was said before. We see APIs in direct real-time interaction with the banks as something that could be very useful for managing really short-term cash, or cash positioning actually. Data crucial nowadays. It's important to have the right models to analyze the data and have make it dynamic with scenario analysis on top of the modeling. So it's data analysis where we see the interesting work and giving the insights on what to do. Focus on certain sales in certain countries or on certain products. So it's really the combination of everything where we see the future going. Having said that, it can't go without people, like you said, like Nicolas said. So the human part of it is still and will be very important still. It's also the acceptance within the wider organization of machine learning in future. Quite often it's perceived as a black box, and we don't know what comes out is correct, and we can't judge it. So it will also take time before that gets accepted. But we really see that as the way forward within Unilever.
Yeah, and I think there's a whole different way of working coming up, and I know we've got Stockmann from the CFT, the Centre for Finance, Technology and Entrepreneurship, going to be speaking later this week, I think tomorrow on Treasury Talent. But she'll say that it's not kind of replacing people. It's people will have to have different skills to know how to work with technology, to work with AI, to kind of trust the data and know what they need to know, but also use technology in the best possible way. I'm rather than going on with some of the questions that we had pre-prepared, we've got quite a lot of questions coming in from the audience. So I was going to just change the pace slightly and ask a very quick fire question to our three treasurers. I want a kind of a one phrase answer. The question is, how do the panel currently process their cash forecast? Do you use a TMS or Excel or other to produce your forecast? So you've got three choices: TMS, Excel, or other. Ginny, what's it to be?
Okay, a mix.
A mix, okay.
A mix, yeah, a mix.
You've got a mix. Gerard?
Yeah, same here, mix with not clearly defined processes around it.
Okay, and James?
I'd say similar. So it's coming mainly from the ERP in each country, but then it comes centrally to us and we consolidate in Excel, I'm sad to say. But we have a plan to improve on that going forward.
Okay, so that there are plans afoot. And then kind of following on from that, one of the questions that we've got here is, does the panel think that the Treasury teams themselves have the tech and people skills to implement new cash forecasting models quickly enough in a crisis like this? And if not, what should they do better next time? I'm going to actually turn to Nicolas on this one, and just because he's having an overview of what many people are doing. So do you think people did have the tech and people skills, and what are the learnings, Nicolas?
Let's say it's an interesting question, and I'll answer the question with the two following observations. Well, first of all, let's say in terms of the tech skills, they're very handy when being in this type of an environment. You need to work with data. You need to collect the data very quickly and to turn around into, let's say, an analysis and let's say a forecast. I think I saw different things. Sometimes actually IT resources were actually gathered for this. So that's one thing I saw, is that, let's say, suddenly Treasury asks for immediate IT resources, whereby some of the IT other projects basically got delayed or, let's say, deprioritized because of the immediate need to actually get someone involved with the right tech skills. But obviously, I think the somewhat greater, larger Treasury departments, or maybe the ones that have, let's say, some tech skills within the department itself, they come out a little bit better, I guess, because they have an internal Treasury resource that can do this. So I can only agree with the fact that it's going to be in the future more like this. So Treasury teams will hire more technically let's say capable people, and certainly those ones that can crawl to data and can combine it with business knowledge. Yeah, they're going to be the ones that a treasurer would need.
Yeah.
Maybe to add from my side, I think that it's also crucial that you have people that understand the business on the purchase to pay, on the order to cash, on the debtor side, that exactly know what goes on in terms of processes and what happens there, in order to feed that into Treasury, to let Treasury understand how that works. Because that, I feel at least, is often a miss within Treasury. We don't have that detailed knowledge on those processes.
That's a really important point. I've seen that so many times in my career, where people just don't look at the business, and they make crucial mistakes because they have an assumption and they haven't got close enough to the business, whether it's in cash flow forecasting or whether it's in other areas of finance forecasting. It's a really, really important point, Gerard. How about other panelists?
Yeah, so Caroline, I'd add to that. I'd say for us, the tech skill set is less of an issue, because we can either access that within our team or we could go out to external vendors. I think why we haven't been able to put forward as much as we'd like with systems, it's more around the well, I suppose being able to get the right behavioural aspects into the firm and the cultural aspects. So quite previously, like I was saying, in the Middle East, cash wasn't a key priority, whereas now it's become a lot more important. So I think going forward, we're going to be able to accelerate that and get people in the right place. But it just wasn't a priority in the past, because liquidity was plentiful and we didn't need to do it as much.
Yeah. So again, there's that silver lining coming out, and that kind of acceleration of transformation is the theme that we're seeing again. Ginny, do you have anything to add on this one?
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree with what the other panels sharing. So with a technology and digitalization can mean that you can have more data in your systems, electronically, and that of course helps when you need a full picture of everything. And also with AI, you can find patterns that invisible to the human eye, but could be quite groundbreaking. And but however, with holistic view of the take into account of all the external factor and also risk measures, I think a cash forecast got to be sort of early warning sign to a company, and also it's got to be more dynamic and easy updated for changing conditions, and able to support the iterative a scenario analysis. It isn't a luxury; it's a necessity right now. Just like as a veteran on a fire distinguisher on a awareness room right now. So we have to make sure that the cash forecasting have to be we act and flat out the warning message for us, and also for us to be more prepared for our direction, and also for the business restructure as well. So all these back to the competency as a treasurer. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. There's lots of images we've talked in the past about cash being the lifeblood of the organisation. I almost think it's now the air we breathe. But moving on from that, we've got some other really good questions. And one of them is, has the panel reacted to pressure to accelerate payments throughout the supply chain to support SMEs through these difficult times? If so, how have they managed the working capital cash impact? And how easily does the panel think it will be to reverse this decision when we emerge from COVID-19? So is there one of the panelists who has actually made some changes to accelerate, to push liquidity out into the ecosystem, into those smaller organizations? Have any of you done that? Give me a nod and I'll turn to you.
Yeah, we've done so as Unilever. We put a certain amount aside to support our key suppliers, or the small SMEs. So we're looking at the moment how best to divide it across the various SMEs. There need to be certain criteria to fulfill by the SMEs, but there's around 500 million set aside for doing so. Obviously, it has an impact on working capital, but as a company, we find this important. I think for the whole ecosystem, it's important that the small SMEs keep on going. So yeah, we've done so. Yeah.
And I think it's really important, that discussion. Again, treasurers now are thinking much more big picture, and we see from our Business of Treasury research how much more strategic they are in getting involved in the business decisions. And there's been this whole debate in 2019 around, is shareholder value the main focus of a business, or is it stakeholder value? And I think certainly in the example of Unilever, very much the focus on a stakeholder value, because it's not just about delivering profits to the shareholder. There are too many other stakeholders out there that want to see businesses doing the right thing. And reputationally, if you're not doing the right thing, then it doesn't matter, you're not going to make the profits. So it's really interesting, again, a transformation that's been happening, but accelerated, I think, through this crisis. But the back of that question was, though, what will we do coming out of this? And well, does that, I guess that remains to be seen, because things are changing so quickly, aren't they? Gerard, do you have a particular view on that?
No, I think it's, as you say, it's difficult to foresee what will happen in future. As far as I know, this was a once-off amount that was put aside. I really don't know whether that's going to be maintained or not. To be honest, I don't think so. But again, I'm not sure. Well,
let's hope that there's some kind of stability that we come back to, but yeah, it's all this radical uncertainty, isn't it? So I've got another really great question here, if I may. This individual says, in my experience, assigning accountability to the inputs to the forecast and a strong governance and KPI framework improves forecasting and accuracy. What are the thoughts of the panel on this? So maybe turn to one of our other treasurers if you've got some strong thoughts on this assigning of accountability. And I think, James, you touched on this earlier, didn't you? So would you like to elaborate a little further?
I think definitely it's very important to have the right accountabilities and be clear on who is doing what. I think related to that is also monitoring, and from an accuracy perspective. So you need to have a framework in place where you can actually monitor the forecasts, refresh them, see how accurate they are, and then have a way to actually explain and understand what's going on. So what we've set up at Chalhoub is regular weekly meetings at the moment across all of our regional teams, and we go through the cash flow forecasts and we understand where there's variances and what the issues are, and that creates a feedback loop as well. So at first, clearly the forecast won't be as accurate as we'd like, but over time we have learnings, we get better, we put more systems in place, and this gradually improves. And I think another point sort of partly linked to that is around treasury education. So I work with a lot of people in the business who prepare forecasts, but they're not directly within treasury. So we have a lot of, say, finance and accounting people in each of the countries. So to enhance that, we're now looking at treasury education and things like ACT certificates, for example. So some of our country finance managers are now doing those, and that gives them more of an insight into that aspect, because while finance and accounting does cover that, I mean, as we know, ACT it's what ACT does. So I think that's also an opportunity for our companies, if you're working with people outside treasury, to make sure the education's there too, to enhance the culture.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for that plug. And there is an educational piece that's a nice session on that people can access. So do have a look at that and do think about, because it's so important. But also very important is you talked about that feedback loop. And again, in my experience, it's stunning really, but I have often come across organizations who don't look back and check how accurate was their forecast and then build on that and improve for the next time. It just kind of, it's left in the past. So it is, it's really, really important point. But just so that we can get through all the questions, I'm going to move on to one for Ginny, if I may. And this question says, does the panel think that the frequency of the cash forecast should be dependent on the cash turnover cycle? So for an FMCG, a daily or weekly forecast versus a monthly forecast for a manufacturer. Do you think it depends on industry? Ginny, what's your thinking there?
Okay, yeah. Historically, the cash forecasting most of the time depends on the industry. Say FMCG, the fast-paced one, got to be more like updated. But right now, I think all of us have to be, as what we mentioned about in the COVID-19, like the uncertainty ahead. So I think all we have to be like more aware and review our cash flow more frequent in order to react promptly and appropriately. Just like one of the research by McKinsey and Company, they just released in last week about the implication for business and the Great Reset, and talking about some of the business. They did examine in the struggles of U.S. small business. They said the three sectors, say restaurants, manufacturing, and retailing, could be facing a long and hard recovery. And some of the sector, just like arts and entertainment and recreation, it could take 4 to 5 years to recover. Now that is the case that we have to look at overall a more holistic approach. Cannot apply the traditional or tactics and approach that we used in the last decade. No, definitely not. We are going to a more uncertainty right now. So we have to react, more promptly. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think you're right, yeah, because you think of a manufacturer, it's this uncertainty and so many different moving parts at the moment. You really got to keep on top of ensuring that you've got your liquidity and ensuring that your forecasts are as good as they can be. And go back to Nicolas' point earlier about having that data, that immediate data, so that you're looking at a very short time frame, but you've got something there. You haven't got the long-term trends, but you're looking at something. And with that, I'd like to turn actually to Nicolas for the next question I have from the audience. And they've asked Nicolas, how secured is your product? Now these days, cybersecurity is a key risk to remote data. How would you give users the confidence?
Yeah, no, a great question, and I think very much also on topic for in today's situation. I think what we, of course, as an organization, as a product builder, need to do is to put the right, I would say, frameworks in place, security guidelines in place within our organization, but also in the product from the design onwards. So for us, it's about getting certifications, but it's also about, let's say, proving to our clients that let's say we adhere to them, or we adhere to the different rules within our organization. So, for example, within our product, we most of the time run in the cloud, in let's say Amazon Web Services or Azure. So obviously we trust on other parties in the market and their security frameworks and their secure treating of the data. Let's say, on the other hand, we trust on ourselves to design our product in a secure way, and finally to treat the data that we get from our clients in a secure way. And I can go to a lot of more technical details, but I'm sure that let's say the audience would contact me for that. But yeah, getting the right security measures in place across the whole organization, across the whole product, is key and needs to be part of the DNA. And that's something we worked on, let's say since the beginning, because we knew that cash forecasting is run by crucial data, and this crucial data, let's say, we're handling on behalf of our clients. Yeah, so it needs to be secure from the onset, from the sheer fundamentals.
Absolutely. So that's very comforting, I think, Nicolas, to hear that. Now, as we're coming towards the end of this discussion, just like to think we've talked about a holistic look and engaging people across our organizations. We've talked about different time horizons. We've talked about the balance between the behavioural and the tech, and the tech kind of capabilities that can enhance cash flow forecasting going forwards. We've also touched a little bit with our panelists on the fact that some of them would like to improve their systems, and there's got a lot going on, and it's maybe not a comprehensive approach at the moment. And we've said that there's been an acceleration in the focus on cash flow forecasting. So I guess that the title of this session is The Future of Cash Flow Forecasting. I'd like to finally talk to all of the panelists and just ask them each in a few words to talk about what what is the future of cash flow forecasting? It maybe seems like a silly or obvious question, but I'd just like to gather your final thoughts on that. And maybe we could stick with Nicolas to start the ball rolling, please.
Right. Well, first of all, a lot of great points have been mentioned during this this session, and I think you summed them up greatly. The future of cash flow forecasting, for me, is really about leveraging all the different techniques. Let's say the techniques around machine learning, AI, data gathering, data transformation, all the techniques that basically support the automation of the actual cash flow forecasting process in a repetitive enough way, because that's one of the key things, as being said as well by James. It's important that everyone can get into a habit of making a cash flow forecast, comparing it with the actuals, learning from that. But the whole process itself is still underway to getting transformed in terms of automation. So for me, the future there is automation, which will support the accuracy, the level of input that's required in the process, so that will decrease over time. But, and I think that's a clear remark from what Gerard said earlier as well, we need to ensure that it doesn't become a black box, so that we can still communicate about the outcome to any other stakeholder within the business. So that is crucial. And on the tech side, AI, machine learning, APIs to real-time, API to systems, APIs to banks, to get to support that automation will be key for the future to come, and for us as well.
Absolutely. So APIs, those interfaces to make stuff work together. Absolutely crucial, as you say. Thanks very much, Nicolas. Ginny, the future of cash flow forecasting for you.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Totally agree with what Nicolas sharing. So we can't get rid of machine learning and technology and AI, and that is crucial for our future cash flow. But we have to use some prioritize natural languages and understanding technology to translate the human language into database query languages. So in short, it will give us some warning, threat out warning, and to let us know what is the next step to be prepare on what's the next step to be done. So that is something else that we're looking forward to have this kind of a threat out message for us in order to give us a more well prepared, and also to react the uncertainty, and also the economy situations in a more profitable growth for all the organization. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Ginny, for those insights. And James, what's your future for cash flow forecasting?
Well, I just say, to add to all those great points on the technological side, moving to the people side, I mean, there is now this great opportunity for us to really drive cash flow forecasting forward as a topic in our organisation. So there's this increased focus on that. There's a willingness to invest on the board. I'd probably say it's a once in a career opportunity, but I mean, these crises tend to happen every 10 years or so. But if you remember back to 2008, there was an opportunity there, and a lot of treasurers took the opportunity. They invested, they improved what they had. Over the years, then things sort of became less of a priority again, and now we're back, and we can now sort of refresh where we are. But definitely that's really the main point for the future, and getting that buy-in from the business stakeholders, a shift in the KPIs to cash metrics, and all of that should improve the quality of future forecasts. So it's quite a good time for us as treasurers now. I would say that's the opportunity going forward.
It is, again, a great message. Grab hold of that opportunity and speak with your key stakeholders on a very regular basis. Just finally, a few quick words from Gerard, if we might.
Yeah. No, very much echo the words of the previous speakers. Maybe to add that from my side is making sure that you're aligned with all the underlying processes leading to a cash forecast. Don't become sloppy in your debtors or in your creditors. Make sure that your forecast for sales or your P&L forecast is accurate, because that eventually is crucial for your cash forecast as well. So don't look at it in isolation, but also look at the other parts that form your cash. But very much data-driven, technology-driven, but still have the human element as part of the overall forecast.
Very good advice there, Gerard. Thank you very much. And just like to close now, thanking my panelists for their time today. Great session. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. And thank you to our audience for joining us.
Thank you. A pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.